1 second. There we go. Now we are live on YouTube and on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Thank you for joining me today. This is exciting. If you're watching from YouTube, you know me primarily for all the nursing skills and theory video that I do, but I also have a series on communication, and that's what these lives focus on, is things we can do to improve our communication, whether that is with our patients, our colleagues, spills over into our family and our love relationships as well. So that's always a bonus. As always, if you'd like to join in on the conversation, you can submit your comments and I will hello you and let me know where you're watching from. And if you have any questions, please pop them in. If you're joining us from Twitter and Facebook, if you would like for your comments to be streamed in here so I can see them, because I'm not actually watching Facebook comments, you'll need to give StreamYard permission. Awesome. So let's just start out with what today is all about. We are asking the question, can we break a habit? Is it possible to change a habit? And we're specifically focusing on those habits that are creating tension in our relationships. Now, if you were with me last week on the personal Facebook page of me, Tammy Dunnett, you would have joined us or would have had access to the beginning conversation around habits. And we talked about just what habits are, gave you some examples, and shared how this awareness is working through my life in real time. And then if you joined us in the Facebook group, so there has been a change in the name, and I will be giving a live on this whole topic and why the change. But if you want to join us in the Facebook group, it's called Relationship Revolution. This is what you're looking for because there's many with the same name. There was a second follow-up video on habits where we talked about getting deeper into starting to bring our awareness to habits. And I shared a story about how I was going through that, like almost live as we were going through it. It happened an hour before I went on live, where my husband and I were kind of working through a challenging conversation. I mean, argument, fight, sure, we can use those words. For me, those are kind of negative words. I prefer a challenging conversation because it definitely challenged me. And with that, I shared how we had competing priorities in the same space. And it was really challenging for both of us to, honestly, it was more challenging for him to collaborate because his needs were so important to him and they were so immediate. And there's a lot of energy associated with that. And I shared how I recognized, like live, while it was happening in the moment, that I had a habit that was potentially going to contribute to a negative outcome. And I was able to stop it. Boom, right there. It was amazing. I wish you could have been there with me in the moment to see how powerful awareness to habits is. So today, I'm just going to summarize a little bit about what habits are, and then we're going to get into digging into how do we change them in order to improve our relationships. That's the whole focus in this series of lives. So with that, just to remind you that there are 3 stages of habits. They are those automatic things that we do that have come out of practice. And that's an important element in terms of changing them, because if you think of, and I use the example of tying your shoes, it was a real conscious act of thinking deliberately about the steps you have to take in order to achieve the outcome, which is the reward. And so if we could not ever develop that automaticity where our brain could just subconsciously take over that task for us, we wouldn't have the freedom and the flexibility to learn the next thing that's coming our way, right? And so habits really serve us well in that way, in that they free up space in our mind. They help us improve our accuracy in things. And so the 3 parts of a habit was, the first thing is a trigger. The second is the routine. And the third was the reward. And we typically think of habits as good things. And then we think of rewards when we look at the bad habits as, well, why would anybody want that as a reward? But we did dive into that in the Facebook group. So you want to go back and watch those videos if you haven't already. Join us in that group. Now, sometimes the habits are easier to identify than others, right? So things like smoking, obvious. You can see it, others can see it, biting your nails. Those kind of habits are a little bit more obvious to identify, but the ones that are actually involved in deepening our relationships or eroding our relationships require that we We pay mind to it. We have a real conscious energy around identifying what are the patterns in my life. That's usually where it starts. When you say, okay, I notice that every time we fight, I get up, I walk away, I slam the door, and I wait in my room hoping that he or she will come after me. That's legit, by the way. I used to be that person. That was a habit. And I never got what I wanted. And so then the reward became I got to feel justified in feeling hurt and damaged and angry and upset, which allowed me to get the next time we had a conversation, I could throw that in their face kind of thing. So the reward wasn't healthy. The reward was not helpful. It wasn't nurturing. It was very self-serving. And I feel like I got a little off track there. That happens. Welcome to my labs, folks. Okay. Where was I on my notes here? Gosh darn. We'll go back to the 3 steps. Trigger. Oh, yes. Being conscious of how habits work in our lives. And the first thing was to identify the pattern. I got there. Once I recognized for myself that the pattern of my behaviors was actually not moving me, not advancing me towards the goals I had for my relationship, I had to rethink the patterns. And that only happened because I brought awareness to the pain of the reward. And then I was able to shift my patterns to something else. And then I was able to identify the trigger. And so sometimes you got to work backwards to figure out what's going on here. That's not a bad thing as long as we get there. Okay. So a trigger is the fight. The routine is get up, go to my room, slam the door and wait. And the reward was he never came. I got to feel justified in being angry. Now, that's a habit I wanted to change. So what does it take to actually shift from a bad habit to a better habit, or just to get rid of it altogether? If you recall when I mentioned that it is a automatic behavior that began with a conscious thought and took practice in order for it to etch into our mind, for it to burn into our mind so that when the trigger happened, we reacted. Much like Pavlov's dog, if you remember that scenario. When they rang the bell, the dog salivated, right? And so how do you rewire your brain to not salivate when the bell rings? It takes awareness. So if you just think about how powerful the mind is to do that, to benefit us in terms of streamlining and making there's space for us to contemplate new things, then we need to harness that behavior, rein it in, and start to use it for good, not for evil. Right? So awareness is the first step. And we did start that conversation last week in our Facebook group. Hey, Abdul, nice to see you again. Thanks for popping in. And we started that work last week in the Facebook group. So if you joined that Facebook group, again, we did talk about bringing awareness and how you could start to do that. So if you want to kind of like go back and review that, head over to that Facebook group. Again, I'll just show you. This is the new name. This is the new logo. This is what you're looking for, Relationship Revolution, where we do relationship different. If you're watching on Instagram, I'm sorry you cannot see that. You'll want to pop over into Facebook or YouTube and join me there. With that, today, that's the first step. If we're going to change a habit, we need to be aware of what's going on. Abdul, if you have any habits you want to share one in there, pop it in there. Let me know what habit you want to fix. I won't share it. It's just more of a curiosity thing. So the awareness around what is happening in my life, why is this not going the way I want? Start to think backwards. We want to uncover the routine that you're taking and what the trigger is so that you can then implement something new. So the second thing is you need to have willpower and motivation to change. Now, those are very much united. You need both, and often they're interchanged incorrectly. Willpower is where you have some sort of control over the outcome, over your actions, over your thoughts and your beliefs. Motivation is your why. And in the story I shared with me being in my bedroom alone, waiting for my husband to come after me, the why was I wanted connection. And so the pain of sitting there feeling alone and rejected was far worse than I imagined, and that's not where I want it to be. So in order to overcome that habit, I got to be way more aware, way more attentive, and a little bit more focused on what I'm going to do. So it requires thinking about the game plan, because it does take time to undo it. Think about biting your nails or smoking. Every time you do that unconscious act, your forebrain, your conscious brain needs to be engaged and say, whoa, wait a second, that's not what we want to do today. We need to change it up. And then you need to have a replacement. So we call that an interruption in the loop. And we're going to talk more about that tomorrow inside the Facebook group in the private members area, about just how do we disrupt the habit loop, because that is the next critical step. So first we bring awareness, and then we have to identify what is our why, what is our skill set, what are we going to need to do in order to change it, and then what is it we're going to do specifically to disrupt the old pattern in order to interject either a new pattern or to stop altogether. And there are so many habits. I talked about biting the nails and smoking, but maybe it's that you have Pepsi every day. Pepsi is your habit. You just can't break it. And I know a lot of people, Pepsi is a big one. Coke, Pepsi, it just became such this thing. And it can cause some health problems. So there are some habits out there that we probably could consider. I wanted to avoid the word should, hence the pause. Could consider modifying to improve our health. The same is true in our workplace relationships. And when we're talking about healthcare, for those who follow me for the healthcare content, it is no different in your collegial relationships with your patients, with their families, with your bosses. There are characteristic ways in which we engage when there are tensions. Maybe you avoid it. Maybe your pattern is to walk away and go complain to your colleague in the lunch break room, but not do anything that actually advances your relationship towards that safety, towards that security that you have and that trust that you want to have in those relationships. And so even in those relationships where we think that doesn't matter as much, it actually matters more, because we need to rely upon each other in the workplace for patient safety, thinking of patients primarily. And so identifying, what do I do every time there's conflict? What is my trigger? Why am I feeling this way? And what can I do differently? I have a friend, Trina, and she always says, what is the next smallest step that you can do today to move towards your goal? And that's really what we're focusing on when we're looking at habits. Is it's not going to change overnight. Smokers just don't stop. Okay, no, wait, I know I'm going to get emails from smokers who just stopped. It's possible, absolutely possible. I am not making any limitations on what you can do. Challenging, yes. And so it takes a monumental willpower and motivation to achieve the goal and to stay on track, replacing the old with the new. So that is today's conversation as we continue to dive into habits. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the 3-step process to actually change them. So tomorrow at 2 inside our Facebook group. With that, I don't really have any more stories of myself to tell today, which is surprising because I always have stories to share. But that would be it for me today. Short and sweet, short and sweet. Thank you for joining me on Instagram and Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We'll see you tomorrow in the Facebook group.